We never touched a white man before, the eldest of three trembling sisters whispered to the stone-faced farmer as dawn broke over his desolate Kansas land. The townspeople called him the Ghost, a hollow shell who'd been spiritually dead since cholera claimed his family. They whispered he'd work himself into an early grave on that cursed farm, alone and forgotten. But these desperate runaways, fleeing brutal captivity with nothing but torn clothes and mysterious legal papers, would either become his final burden or the salvation neither expected. Hidden in those scattered documents lay secrets that could transform three escaped women into rightful landowners, or get them all killed by the ruthless men hunting them. Would the dead farmer's awakening conscience destroy them both? Or forge an alliance that defied everything the frontier believed about justice? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The sun barely touched the Kansas horizon when Isaiah Carter began his ritual. Shovel dirt. Check fences. Tend livestock. The same mechanical movements he'd performed every morning for 2 years since cholera took everything that mattered. His farm stretched across barren acres that once held promise. Now it served only as a place to wait for death. The townspeople understood this. They called him the Ghost Farmer when they thought he couldn't hear. Technically breathing, but spiritually buried alongside his wife Sarah and infant son. Isaiah preferred their whispers to their pity. Both reminded him why he avoided town except for monthly supply runs. The general store owner would nod curtly. The blacksmith would grunt acknowledgement. No one expected conversation from a dead man. The well pump creaked as he drew water for the day. Metal against metal, the only sound besides wind across empty fields. He carried the bucket toward the barn, boots crunching on frost-hardened ground. Movement near the property line caught his attention. 3 figures stumbled through tall grass, moving like wounded animals. Women. Black women in torn dresses, supporting each other as they approached his well. Isaiah stopped 20 feet away. The eldest woman immediately stepped in front of her companions. Her eyes darted between Isaiah's face and the water bucket in his hands, calculating, measuring threat levels. "We ain't looking for trouble," she said. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much. "Just water." The middle sister swayed on her feet. Exhaustion painted dark circles under her eyes. The youngest couldn't be more than 19, clutching papers against her chest like they contained salvation. Isaiah studied their condition. Days of hard travel, no food, probably running from something worse than starvation. He'd seen runaway workers before. Most passed through without stopping. These 3 had stopped. He set the bucket near the well and stepped back. The eldest woman watched him retreat, confusion flickering across her features. Men didn't retreat. Men took. "We never touched a white man before," she whispered to her sisters. "Not one who didn't hurt us." The words hung in the morning air like smoke from a dying fire. Isaiah understood. Trust was a luxury none of them could afford, yet here they stood, desperate enough to risk approaching a stranger. The youngest sister stumbled forward first, papers scattered from her torn bag as she reached the bucket. Legal documents, land deeds, property boundaries drawn in careful ink. Isaiah glimpsed fragments of text before the wind scattered the pages. Samuel Johnson, 300 acres, legal purchase. His mind, sharpened by countless nights reading law books in grief-driven insomnia, began connecting fragments. These weren't just runaways. The middle sister helped gather the papers, while the eldest maintained her protective stance. They moved with practiced efficiency, sisters who'd learned survival through coordination. Dust clouds appeared on the distant road, riders approaching fast. The eldest woman's head snapped toward the sound, fear replacing wariness. "Kincaid's men," she breathed. "They found us." Isaiah knew that name. Travis Kincaid ran the largest work operation in 3 counties, paid well for returned workers, asked few questions about working conditions. The kind of man the sheriff tolerated because money spoke louder than conscience. The riders would reach his property within minutes. 3 exhausted women couldn't outrun mounted men. Math was simple, brutal, final. Isaiah looked at his storm cellar, built to withstand tornadoes, hidden beneath the kitchen floor, large enough for 3 people if they didn't mind cramped quarters. 2 years of isolation had taught him to calculate risk versus reward. Helping strangers meant complications, questions, involvement with a world he'd abandoned. But those scattered papers told a different story. Legal ownership, rightful inheritance, justice delayed but not destroyed. Something stirred in his chest. Not quite hope, not yet purpose, but the first crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "This way," he said. The eldest sister hesitated. "Why?" "Because you're right. About men like me." He led them toward his cabin. Behind them, riders crested the hill. 6 men in dusty coats, moving with the confidence of hunters who'd cornered their prey. Isaiah lifted the kitchen floorboards, revealing stairs descending into darkness. The storm cellar held supplies for emergencies. This qualified. "Get down there. Stay quiet no matter what you hear." The youngest sister clutched his arm. "The papers, they're important." "I know." The eldest woman studied his face one final time. Whatever she saw there satisfied her. She gathered her sisters and descended into the cellar. Isaiah replaced the floorboards just as hoofbeats reached his yard. Through the window, he watched Travis Kincaid dismount. Tall man with cold eyes and expensive boots, the kind who'd built wealth on other people's desperation. "Morning, Carter." Kincaid's voice carried authority learned from having men jump when he spoke. "Seen any travelers this morning?" Isaiah stepped onto his porch. Empty water buckets still sat by the well. No obvious signs of visitors. But Kincaid hadn't survived this long by missing details. "Just me and the chickens. 3 women passed through last night. Stole property from my operation. Worth good money to whoever helps return them." Money, the universal language of frontier justice. Isaiah had once cared about money before learning that grief couldn't be purchased or bargained away. "Haven't seen anyone." Kincaid studied the farm. His men spread out, checking the barn and outbuildings, professional searchers who knew how to find what others tried to hide. Beneath the kitchen floor, 3 women waited in darkness. Their fate balanced on Isaiah's decision to rejoin a world he'd abandoned. Success meant complications he wasn't ready to handle. Failure meant consequences he couldn't live with. The ghost farmer was about to discover whether dead men could choose sides. Kincaid's men searched for 20 minutes. They checked every corner of the barn, poked through haystacks, examined the chicken coop, found nothing but dust and disappointment. "They came this way," Kincaid muttered, studying tracks that ended at Isaiah's well. 3 sets of footprints, fresh. Isaiah leaned against his porch rail. Wind erases tracks fast out here. The lie sat heavy in his chest. 2 years of isolation had stripped away his talent for deception. But desperation taught quick lessons. Kincaid mounted his horse. "They'll surface somewhere. When they do, remember my offer. Good money for good information." The riders disappeared toward town, leaving dust clouds and unspoken threats. Isaiah waited until the horizon swallowed them before lifting the floorboards. 3 pairs of eyes stared up at him from the darkness. The eldest sister climbed out first, every muscle coiled for flight. Her sisters followed, clutching those scattered papers like lifelines. "Thank you," the youngest whispered. Her gratitude carried weight that pressed against Isaiah's chest. "They'll be back," he said. "Kincaid doesn't quit easy." The middle sister gathered the fallen documents with careful hands. Each paper represented something larger than escape, something worth dying for. Isaiah studied the fragments she'd collected. His mind, trained through countless sleepless nights reading legal texts, began assembling the puzzle. Property deeds, purchase receipts, survey maps drawn in precise ink. "Your father bought land," he said. The eldest sister's shoulders tensed. "What's it to you?" "Everything, if these papers are legitimate." He spread the documents across his kitchen table. Sunlight streaming through dirty windows illuminated careful handwriting. Samuel Johnson had documented every transaction, every payment. Every legal step required for a freedman to purchase property in Kansas territory, 300 acres of prime farmland, water rights included, mineral rights secured, worth more money than most men saw in a lifetime. "Where's this land located?" Isaiah asked. 5 miles east, the middle sister answered, near Willow Creek. Isaiah knew the area. Rich soil, good drainage, the kind of property that attracted attention from men like Kincaid. Men who believed ownership was determined by power rather than law. The youngest sister touched his arm. "Daddy saved for 15 years to buy that land, worked extra jobs, went without food, said it was for us." Her words carried the weight of dreams passed down through generations. Isaiah understood inheritance. He'd inherited grief. These women had inherited hope. "When did he die?" Isaiah asked. 6 months ago, the eldest sister said. "Kincaid showed up 3 days after the funeral, claimed Daddy owed him money, said we had to work his operation until the debt was paid." The pattern became clear. Wait for landowners to die, claim fictional debts, force families into labor, take their property through legal manipulation, simple, effective, profitable. But Samuel Johnson had been careful. These documents proved legitimate purchase, clear title, no outstanding debts. Isaiah felt something crack inside his chest. Not quite hope, but the first stirring of purpose he'd experienced since losing his family. "I can help you," he said. The eldest sister studied his face. "Why? Because I know law. Been reading it for 2 years, learning how justice is supposed to work." The truth was simpler. Darker. After Sarah and his son died, Isaiah had searched legal texts for someone to blame. Doctors who'd failed to save them, officials who'd ignored the cholera outbreak, anyone responsible for his loss. He'd found no one to prosecute, but he'd learned law in the process. "What kind of help?" the middle sister asked. "Legal help. These papers prove your ownership. But proving it in court requires strategy." Isaiah pulled law books from the shelf beside his bed, volumes he'd studied during grief-stricken nights when sleep brought only nightmares. Contract law, property rights, inheritance procedures, knowledge acquired through pain was about to serve justice. "Kincaid's claiming your land through fraudulent debt papers," Isaiah explained. "He'll file ownership claims while you're missing." "Take possession through legal manipulation." The youngest sister clutched her papers tighter. "Can he do that?" "Not if we file counterclaims first." Isaiah's mind began working like it hadn't since before the cholera outbreak. Legal strategy replacing emotional paralysis. Purpose filling the void where hope used to live. But filing claims required appearing in court. 3 missing women couldn't exactly walk into the courthouse without raising questions. Questions that led back to Kincaid. "There's a problem," Isaiah continued. "You can't show your faces in town. Kincaid's got the sheriff looking for you." The eldest sister's jaw tightened. "So we run, leave the land, find somewhere else to hide." "Running won't work. Kincaid's connected to operations in 3 counties. He'll track you down eventually." Isaiah spread a survey map across the table. The Johnson property bordered his own land. 300 acres of rich soil that could support entire families for generations. "There's another option," he said. "We fight for it." The middle sister touched the map with gentle fingers. "How?" "I represent you. File the papers as your legal advocate. Build a case that proves your father's legitimate ownership." It was ambitious, dangerous, likely to fail. But Isaiah felt his legal mind awakening like a muscle that had been dormant too long. The eldest sister studied him with calculating eyes. "What do you want in return?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Isaiah considered his answer carefully. 2 years of isolation had taught him the price of caring about anything. But those scattered papers represented more than property. They represented justice delayed, but not denied. "Nothing," he said, "just the chance to make something right." The ghost farmer had found his reason to rejoin the living. The storm cellar became their headquarters. Isaiah moved his law books underground, transforming the space into a makeshift legal office. candles provided light. Wooden crates served as desks. Justice had operated from worse conditions. The eldest sister introduced herself as Amara. Her middle sister was Zola. The youngest, Mira. Names carried power, Isaiah realized. These weren't just runaways anymore. They were clients. Amara studied legal documents with surprising skill. Daddy taught me to read contracts, said knowledge was the only thing nobody could steal. Her father had been wise. Samuel Johnson's papers revealed meticulous planning, every purchase documented, every payment recorded, every legal requirement satisfied. But Kincaid was moving fast. Isaiah's weekly trip to town revealed disturbing developments. The general store owner mentioned new filings at the courthouse, property claims against the Johnson land, debt collections authorized by the sheriff. How long before he takes possession? Amara asked when Isaiah returned. 3 weeks, maybe less. Time was their enemy, but Isaiah had advantages Kincaid didn't expect. 2 years of legal study had taught him procedural strategies, ways to delay, methods to challenge, loopholes that could buy precious weeks. Zola proved invaluable for intelligence gathering. While Isaiah handled legal research, she slipped away at night, returning with information from sympathetic townspeople. The preacher's wife had questions about Kincaid's methods. The banker's daughter wondered about those missing women. People are starting to ask questions, Zola reported. Some folks don't like Kincaid's tactics. Doubt was spreading. Isaiah felt the first stirring of hope since his family's death. Mira contributed through different talents. Her artistic skills helped recreate property boundaries from memory. She drew detailed maps showing fence lines, water sources, and landmarks that proved the Johnson family's intimate knowledge of their land. Daddy walked me across every acre, she said, sketching with careful precision. Taught me where the good soil was, where to plant corn, where to dig wells. Her maps became evidence. Proof of family connection to the land that went beyond legal documents. Isaiah's cabin transformed during those weeks. Zola tended his neglected garden, bringing life back to soil that had grown barren through grief. Green shoots pushed through earth like hope breaking through despair. Plants know when someone cares, she said, watering tomato seedlings. Same as people. Her words carried deeper meaning. Isaiah felt something awakening in his chest, not quite healing, but the first crack in walls he'd built around his heart. Strange incidents began occurring around town. Kincaid's supply wagon suffered broken wheels. His men's horses went missing from hitching posts. Key witnesses suddenly became unavailable for court appointments. Isaiah suspected sabotage, but couldn't prove anything. Someone was working against Kincaid from the shadows. You notice anything odd about these setbacks? He asked Amara one evening. She maintained careful neutrality. Bad luck follows bad men. Her answer felt rehearsed. Isaiah sensed hidden currents beneath the surface. But pressing for details might fracture trust they couldn't afford to lose. The legal hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. 3 days remained to finalize their strategy. Isaiah had prepared counterclaims, challenging every aspect of Kincaid's fictional debt. Property law favored documented ownership over verbal agreements, but winning required more than legal technicalities. They needed community support. Elder Nathaniel provided that breakthrough. The retired judge arrived at Isaiah's farm on Wednesday evening, moving with the careful dignity of advanced years. His unexpected visit sent Amara diving for the storm cellar. Heard you've been asking questions about property law, Nathaniel said, studying Isaiah's cabin with sharp eyes. Academic interest. Academic. Nathaniel's smile carried decades of courtroom experience. Mind if I examine your academic materials? Isaiah had no choice. He led Nathaniel to the cellar where legal documents covered every surface. The old judge's eyes widened as he absorbed the scope of their preparation. Samuel Johnson's inheritance claim, Nathaniel murmured, reading survey maps. Thought those women were dead. They're alive, and they're fighting for what's rightfully theirs. Nathaniel examined each document with professional thoroughness. His expression grew increasingly grim as he uncovered the extent of Kincaid's deception. This is solid work, he he finally said. Better than most lawyers could manage. But winning in court requires more than legal merit. What do you mean? I mean, Kincaid's got influence. Money talks louder than justice in frontier courts. Isaiah felt hope cracking like ice under pressure. So we lose? Not necessarily. Nathaniel's voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. But victory requires community pressure. People need to see this case as bigger than 3 missing women. How? By making it about property rights. Every landowner in the county should fear Kincaid's tactics. If he can steal from the Johnsons, he can steal from anyone. The strategy was brilliant. Transform individual injustice into community threat. Make Kincaid's methods everyone's problem. Isaiah spent Thursday visiting neighboring farms. He carried copies of Samuel Johnson's purchase documents, showing other landowners the quality of legal proof that Kincaid was trying to override. Fear spread faster than wildfire. Farmers who'd worked decades to build their holdings recognized the threat Kincaid represented. If fraudulent debt claims could steal Johnson land, no property was safe. By Thursday evening, promises of courtroom support came from unexpected sources. The blacksmith pledged to testify about Samuel Johnson's character. The general store owner offered to verify purchase receipts. Even the banker's wife promised to attend the hearing. Community solidarity was building. But Isaiah sensed other forces at work. Those mysterious setbacks plaguing Kincaid's operation suggested organized resistance beyond coincidence. Friday morning would reveal whether legal justice could triumph over frontier corruption, whether 3 sisters could reclaim their father's dream, whether a dead man's awakening conscience could resurrect hope from the ashes of grief. The ghost farmer was about to discover if resurrection was possible. Friday morning arrived with thunderclouds gathering on the horizon. Isaiah woke before dawn, finding Amara already awake in the storm cellar, staring at her father's papers by candlelight. "Second thoughts?" he asked. "Every night for 20 years. Her honesty cut through pretense. Today would either vindicate Samuel Johnson's sacrifice or destroy his daughter's only chance at justice. The courthouse filled early. Isaiah had never seen such community turnout for a property hearing. Farmers occupied every bench. Shopkeepers lined the walls. Even children pressed against windows, sensing history in motion. Kincaid arrived with 4 men in expensive suits, lawyers from the territorial capital, the kind of legal firepower that crushed frontier justice under mountains of procedural complexity. Isaiah felt his confidence wavering. 2 years of solitary study couldn't match professional legal training. David had faced better odds against Goliath. Judge Morrison called the session to order. A fair man, but one who understood political realities. Kincaid's influence reached deep into territorial politics. "Case of Kincaid versus Johnson Estate," Morrison announced. "Plaintiff claims outstanding debt against deceased Samuel Johnson. Defendant representation?" Isaiah stood. Isaiah Carter, representing the Johnson heirs. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The ghost farmer emerging from isolation to fight for 3 missing women. Some viewed it as noble, others as foolish. Kincaid's lead attorney presented first. Polished delivery, professional charts, documented proof of loans allegedly made to Samuel Johnson. The case appeared airtight. But Isaiah had spent weeks studying those documents. Every signature, every date, every witness statement. His legal mind, sharpened through grief-driven obsession, detected flaws invisible to casual examination. "Your Honor," Isaiah began, "I request permission to examine the plaintiff's evidence." Morrison nodded. Isaiah approached the exhibit table, studying loan documents with methodical precision. The signatures were perfect, too perfect. Samuel Johnson's handwriting had subtle variations that forgers typically missed. More damning was the paper itself. Kincaid's loans were supposedly made over 2 years, but every document used identical paper stock. Same thickness, same watermark, same aging patterns. These documents were created simultaneously, Isaiah announced. Not over time as claimed. Kincaid's attorney objected. "Speculation without foundation." I can prove it. Isaiah pulled out samples of authentic Johnson documents. Notice the paper variations in legitimate transactions. Different suppliers, different aging, different ink formulations. Elder Nathaniel leaned forward, studying the evidence with professional interest. His nod carried weight with Judge Morrison, but Isaiah's greatest revelation was yet to come. Your Honor, I call Martha Wellington to testify. The banker's wife stepped forward, clutching a worn ledger book. Her presence stunned the courtroom. Respectable women rarely testified in property disputes. Mrs. Wellington, did you know Samuel Johnson? Yes, he deposited money at my husband's bank for 15 years, saving for his land purchase. She opened her ledger, revealing meticulous records. Every deposit documented, every withdrawal accounted for. Samuel Johnson's financial history told through careful bookkeeping. Did Mr. Johnson ever mention debts to Travis Kincaid? Never. He was proud of avoiding debt. Said freedom meant owning what you worked for. Kincaid's attorney cross-examined aggressively, but Martha Wellington held firm. Her testimony demolished the debt narrative completely. Isaiah felt momentum shifting, but victory required more than discrediting Kincaid's claims. They needed to prove the Johnson sisters' rightful ownership. Your Honor, I call the rightful heirs to testify. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone knew the Johnson women were missing, presumed dead or fled beyond reach. Then Amara entered from the back of the room. Her presence electrified the crowd. Whispers erupted as people recognized one of the missing sisters. She walked with dignity that commanded respect, carrying herself like the landowner she was born to be. State your name for the record. Amara Johnson, daughter of Samuel Johnson, rightful heir to 300 acres near Willow Creek. Her voice carried across the courtroom without trembling. Isaiah felt pride swelling in his chest. This was what courage looked like. Did your father owe money to Travis Kincaid? No. Daddy saved every penny for 15 years, never borrowed from anyone. Amara produced additional evidence Isaiah hadn't seen. Letters from her father discussing the land purchase, family photographs showing the Johnsons working their property, personal items that proved intimate connection to the disputed acres. But her most powerful testimony came when Kincaid's attorney attacked her credibility. Where have you been hiding these past months? Running from men who enslaved us after Daddy's death, fighting for the right to claim what's legally ours. The word enslaved hit the courtroom like thunder. Kincaid's face darkened as his operation's true nature was exposed. Zola and Mira entered next, corroborating their sister's testimony. 3 women standing together, demanding justice their father had earned through decades of sacrifice. Judge Morrison studied the competing evidence. Fraudulent debt papers versus documented ownership. Corporate lawyers versus a grieving family's determination. The law was clear, but frontier justice often ignored legal clarity when money and influence pressed against righteousness. I'll render my decision after reviewing all evidence, Morrison announced. Isaiah felt his heart sinking. Delays favored Kincaid. Time allowed influence to work behind closed doors. Then Elder Nathaniel stood. Your Honor, as former territorial judge, I've reviewed this evidence thoroughly. The Johnson claim is legitimate. The debt allegations are fraudulent. Justice delayed is justice denied. His words carried the weight of decades in territorial courts. Other community leaders nodded agreement. The banker stood. The preacher rose. One by one, respected citizens declared support for the Johnson sisters. Isaiah realized the truth. Those mysterious setbacks plaguing Kincaid hadn't been random sabotage. They'd been coordinated resistance by people who understood the stakes. The ghost farmer hadn't been fighting alone. An entire community had been working in the shadows, waiting for this moment to stand in the light. But the biggest revelation was yet to come. Judge Morrison called for recess to review evidence. The courtroom buzzed with tension as people clustered in heated discussions. Kincaid's lawyers huddled around their client, whispering urgent strategies. Isaiah found himself surrounded by community members offering support. The blacksmith gripped his shoulder. The general store owner praised his legal work. Even children stared with wide-eyed admiration at the ghost farmer who'd found his voice. But Amara pulled him aside, away from the crowd. "There's something you need to know," she said. Her voice carried urgency that made Isaiah's stomach tighten. Before she could explain, Martha Wellington approached with her ledger book. Her expression held secrets that demanded attention. "Mr. Carter, that night you asked about strange incidents around town," Martha began. "Those weren't coincidences." Isaiah felt pieces clicking into place. Missing supply wagons, unavailable witnesses, broken equipment that delayed Kincaid's operations. "Someone's been organizing resistance," he said. "Not someone, many people. Good people who understood what Kincaid represented." Martha opened her ledger to pages Isaiah hadn't seen. Financial records showing payments to drivers who'd delivered supplies to mysterious locations. Funds transferred to help families escape Kincaid's operations. Money that supported a network larger than anyone suspected. "We've been helping people for 2 years," Martha continued. "Families like yours, workers who needed safe passage north, anyone running from injustice." The revelations staggered Isaiah. While he'd isolated himself in grief, his community had been fighting organized oppression. The Underground Railroad network wasn't just legend. It was operating right under everyone's noses. "Amara knew?" he asked. Martha nodded toward the Johnson sisters. "She's been our best coordinator. Smart, careful. Never puts anyone at unnecessary risk." Isaiah studied Amara with new understanding. Those nighttime disappearances hadn't been escape planning. She'd been organizing resistance operations, building networks that protected vulnerable families across 3 counties. "That's why Kincaid wants her back so badly," Martha explained. "Not just as a worker. She knows too much about his operations, names, locations, evidence that could destroy him." The stakes were higher than property disputes. This was about dismantling systematic oppression that reached beyond individual cases. Judge Morrison returned, calling the courtroom to order. His expression revealed nothing about his decision. Frontier judges learned poker faces early in their careers. "After reviewing all evidence," Morrison began, "I find the plaintiff's debt claims lack credible documentation. The Johnson family's ownership appears legitimate and well documented." Relief flooded through Isaiah's chest. They'd won the legal battle. "However," Morrison continued, "questions remain about the current heir's ability to maintain property ownership given their recent circumstances." Isaiah's relief curdled into dread. Morrison was looking for reasons to compromise. Give Kincaid partial victory despite legal defeat. "Your Honor," Isaiah said, rising to his feet, "the Johnson sisters have demonstrated their commitment to their father's legacy through their courage in pursuing this legal remedy." "Commitment is admirable," Morrison replied, "but property ownership requires practical considerations: security, agricultural knowledge, community standing." Kincaid's lead attorney sensed opportunity. "Your Honor, my client offers to purchase the disputed property at fair market value, solving practical concerns while compensating the heirs appropriately." The offer was tactical brilliance. Kincaid couldn't steal the land legally, but he could pressure the sisters into selling under difficult circumstances. Amara stood before Isaiah could object. "Your Honor, my family didn't sacrifice for 15 years to sell our inheritance to the man who enslaved us." Her words carried dignity that silenced the courtroom. But Morrison's expression suggested practical concerns outweighed emotional appeals. "Miss Johnson, property ownership requires resources your family may lack after recent hardships. We have resources." Amara's confidence surprised everyone, including Isaiah. She approached the judge's bench with documents he hadn't seen before. "These are bank statements showing funds my father saved beyond his land purchase, enough to operate the farm independently for 2 years. Samuel Johnson had been more thorough than anyone realized. Not content with buying land, he'd saved additional money to ensure his daughters could maintain their inheritance. But Amara wasn't finished. "We also have community support from neighbors willing to assist our agricultural operations." She gestured toward the packed courtroom. Farmers nodded agreement. The blacksmith raised his hand in support. Even Martha Wellington stood, declaring the bank's willingness to provide agricultural loans. Isaiah watched in amazement as his client demonstrated leadership skills that surpassed his own. Amara wasn't just fighting for property. She was building coalitions that would outlast individual court cases. Judge Morrison studied the expanded evidence. Community support changed legal calculations significantly. Courts preferred stability, and stable communities supported the Johnson claim. "Very well," Morrison announced. "I hereby rule the Johnson property belongs to its rightful heirs. All claims against the estate are dismissed with prejudice." The courtroom erupted in cheers. Isaiah felt years of grief lifting from his shoulders like morning fog burning away in sunlight. But Kincaid wasn't finished. "Your Honor," his attorney interjected, "my client has additional claims pending regarding stolen property and breach of contract." "What stolen property?" "3 workers who violated their employment agreements by abandoning contracted positions." Isaiah's blood chilled. Kincaid was pivoting to criminal charges. Even after losing the civil case, he could still prosecute the Johnson sisters for leaving his operation. Enslavement disguised as employment law. The oldest trick in the Frontier Justice Handbook. Morrison's expression darkened. Criminal allegations required different legal standards. Burden of proof shifted dramatically when freedom itself was at stake. "Mr. Carter, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Isaiah looked at Amara. Her face had gone pale, but her spine remained straight. She'd known this moment would come. "Your Honor," Isaiah began, his voice carrying new strength, "I believe we can demonstrate those employment agreements were obtained through fraud and coercion." The real battle was just beginning. Kincaid's criminal allegations hung over the courtroom like storm clouds ready to break. Isaiah felt the weight of justice shifting against them despite their property victory. "Your Honor," Kincaid's attorney continued, "these women signed binding employment contracts. Their abandonment of agreed duties constitutes theft of services." Judge Morrison examined the employment documents with growing concern. Frontier law took contracts seriously, regardless of working conditions. Broken agreements meant criminal liability. Isaiah studied the papers over Morrison's shoulder. The contracts appeared legitimate. Signatures matched. Witnesses were documented. But something nagged at his legal instincts. "May I examine these employment agreements?" Isaiah requested. Morrison handed over the documents. Isaiah spread them across the defense table, his mind racing through 2 years of legal study. Contract law had been his obsession during the darkest nights of grief. The signatures were perfect, too perfect, just like the fraudulent debt papers. But the real problem was timing. The employment contracts were dated 3 days after Samuel Johnson's funeral, 3 days after his daughters had lost everything they'd known about security and family. "Your Honor, I call Sheriff Davidson to testify about the circumstances surrounding these contract signatures." The sheriff rose reluctantly from the back of the courtroom. His discomfort was obvious. Davidson had been present when Kincaid first approached the Johnson sisters. "Sheriff, were you present when these employment agreements were signed?" "Yes." "Describe the circumstances." Davidson's jaw worked silently. He glanced toward Kincaid before answering. The Johnson women had just buried their father. Kincaid arrived with legal papers claiming outstanding debts. Said they could work off what was owed or face prosecution. Were they given time to review these contracts? Not really. Kincaid said it was sign immediately or go to jail. The courtroom stirred. Coerced signatures invalidated contract law. Isaiah felt momentum shifting back toward justice. But Amara stood before he could press the advantage. "Your Honor, I have something to say about those contracts." Her voice carried quiet authority that commanded attention. Isaiah watched nervously as his client took control of her own defense. "I can read," Amara said simply. "Daddy taught me contracts and law. I knew those papers Kincaid brought were fake." Morrison leaned forward. "Then why did you sign?" "Because he had guns. We had nothing. Sometimes survival means signing papers you know are worthless." Her honesty cut through legal technicalities like sunlight through fog. This wasn't about contract law. This was about power, and the ways desperate people were forced to submit to it. Elder Nathaniel rose from the gallery. "Your Honor, as former territorial judge, I've seen this pattern before. Kincaid targets families at their most vulnerable moment. Uses legal intimidation to force compliance, creates binding agreements through coercion." "That's a serious allegation," Morrison replied. "I can prove it." Nathaniel produced a worn folder containing documents Isaiah had never seen. Legal complaints from other families. Testimony from workers who'd escaped Kincaid's operations. Evidence of systematic abuse disguised as legitimate business. "This has been happening for 3 years," Nathaniel explained. "Families lose their patriarch. Kincaid appears with fraudulent debt claims, forces survivors into labor contracts, takes their property through legal manipulation." The pattern was clear, predatory, criminal. Martha Wellington stood again, her banker's ledger open to damning evidence. "I have financial records showing Kincaid's payments to court clerks and witnesses. Money that influenced legal proceedings in his favor. Corruption, bribery, systematic perversion of frontier justice." Judge Morrison's face darkened as the scope of Kincaid's operations became clear. This wasn't isolated fraud. This was organized crime disguised as business practice. "Mr. Kincaid," Morrison said, "these are serious allegations against your character and methods." Kincaid's composure finally cracked. Years of unchallenged authority were crumbling under community resistance he'd never expected. "Those people signed legal contracts," he snarled. "I provided employment when they had nothing." "Employment?" Amara's voice cut across the courtroom like a blade. "You chained us to beds at night, rationed food like we were animals, beat anyone who complained." Her words silenced the room. Truth had a power that legal arguments couldn't match. Zola stood beside her sister. "Show them your back, Amara. Show them what Kincaid's employment looks like." Isaiah held his breath. This was dangerous territory. But Amara turned, lifting her dress to reveal scars across her shoulders, evidence of systematic brutality that no employment contract could justify. The courtroom gasped. Even hardened frontiermen looked away from wounds that spoke to sustained cruelty. "Your Honor," Isaiah said quietly, "I move to dismiss all charges against the Johnson sisters. These women were victims, not criminals." Morrison studied the evidence spread before him. Fraudulent contracts, bribed officials, systematic abuse. The case against Kincaid was overwhelming. Motion granted, all criminal charges dismissed. But Morrison wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm issuing arrest warrants for Travis Kincaid on charges of fraud, bribery, and human trafficking. Sheriff Davidson, please take him into custody." The courtroom erupted as Kincaid was led away in chains. Justice had not only been served but amplified beyond individual cases. Isaiah felt something he hadn't experienced since before the cholera outbreak. Hope. Not just for legal victory, but for systematic change that would protect other vulnerable families. 6 months later, Isaiah stood beside Amara on the Johnson property. 300 acres of rich farmland stretched toward the horizon. Crops planted by free hands grew tall under summer sun. Zola managed the main house while Mira painted landscapes that captured the beauty their father had sacrificed to secure. The Johnson sisters had not just reclaimed their inheritance, they had transformed it into something greater. Isaiah's own farm prospered beside theirs. His isolation had ended not through romantic attachment, but through partnership in justice. The ghost farmer had learned that resurrection was possible through purpose beyond personal grief. The Underground Railroad network continued operating with new confidence. Martha Wellington coordinated financial support. Elder Nathaniel provided legal guidance. Sheriff Davidson, freed from Kincaid's influence, actively protected families seeking help. Community had replaced corruption. Justice had defeated systematic oppression. As sunset painted the Kansas sky gold, Isaiah and Amara stood together on land their courage had reclaimed. Two broken souls had found strength in each other and built something larger than individual healing. The ghost farmer lived again. The runaway sisters had come home. Justice had found its voice in the most unlikely alliance the frontier had ever seen.